Welcome to another series of local rock stars. Today we're with Ben Ortlip. He's my rock star when it comes to things going on with culture, like culture at your business or culture in your family and things like that. So Ben's agreed to be with us and talk to us a little bit about what he's discovered about culture. And so Ben, thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
And tell us a little bit, how did you kind of get to the point to where you thought, you know what, culture is something that I really think we can go deep on?
Well, I wanted to know what culture was. I've been writing leadership and management content for all kinds of different people for many, many years. And then I started hearing people talk about culture. I remember one of the magazines that I was the editor of for a season. The theme of the whole thing was culture. And I remember thinking, wow, that is... just the word has kind of a vibey feel. And so culture came onto the scene as something that everybody was talking about. But I remember thinking, I didn't really know what it was. I just knew that it was the word that you used when there
sexy.
When you couldn't put your finger on something that made an impact on you, you would call it's just the culture. And so I noticed everybody talking about that, and the way my mind works, I couldn't help wanting to sort of reverse engineer. Yeah, but what is that? What caused that feeling of, hey, that's their culture? Because when the culture is bad, you just know you don't want to have anything to do with it. And when the culture's good, you just know that I don't know what it is, but I want to be part of it.
So who are some good cultures? Who are some companies?
Everybody talks about Google. Google's a great culture. Chick-fil-A has a renowned culture. And I think one of the things that consistency is one of the things that people notice about it. That's when they say it's just their culture. We all run into hit or miss people who do things well and then something doesn't happen well. We never say that's their culture. It's only when we see consistently something happening that we become convinced that it's really in their DNA. That's what we mean when we say it's part of their culture. We're talking about some kind of a brand DNA that regardless of the artifact that shows what it is, we just know that it's reliably going to come from them no matter what happens.
So what are the main parts of culture? What are the main pieces of it?
Well, ironically, culture is just the byproduct of the same old blocking and tackling that we've always done. The challenge today with producing culture on purpose is that the complexity of the world today, there's so many moving parts that it's really gotten more and more difficult to predictably produce an outcome. If you have a company with 20 employees, how can you just get farther and farther away from the customer encounter? And so how do I make sure that what I want to happen happens? So the charge is to try to create an organizational culture that's similar to what you would be if it were just the you culture standing there interacting with the customer. And it's, but at the end of the day, when you're running an organization, the way that you create culture is through the same disciplines of management and leadership. And it's not so much about creating the vibe around your company the way a lot of people think it is. That if we have different colored balloons, then we have a fun, festive culture. Or if we have, library books everywhere, then that gives us, a studious culture. Or it's not that at all. And there's another topic here that comes up immediately when you start talking about culture, and it's engagement. And now that's a big word in big companies,
right?
But engagement happens right here. And you'll notice, like if we started talking about bass fishing or something like that, there would either be an attraction that would create, that would draw us both to this topic.
Because we liked it.
Or if we were talking about ballet, maybe, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with ballet, but, depending on what it is that's teed up,
right?
The core value that we're teeing up, any one of us would either be naturally drawn toward it or drawn away. Well, engagement is that thing that draws us to something or not. And so there are things, when you go back to this organization, when you got 10 or 20 people there are things that you can do to create engagement. Engagement's like a magnetic knob that you can turn, and it causes people to come to this thing that you're creating together, or if you neglect it, it causes them to drift away.
Wow.
And so what you are as a culture, your cultural DNA or your corporate personality, it could be anything, but it's still the strength that always revolves around the level of attraction that you create to that.
And that's like with employees as well as customers?
Yeah. In the old days, it used to be that an organization would be whatever it was on the inside. And then you would fly up to New York and go to Madison Avenue and see one of the ad agencies there, and you would purchase an external facing brand. And they would give you a logo, they would give you a fancy headline, they would write a jingle and sing it for you, they would create a label that goes on your product, and it had nothing to do with who you were as a company. It was all based on the research out in the marketplace of what they discovered that customers would be attracted to. Well, nowadays, because of social media and the internet and how connected our world is, that internal culture has to be exactly the same as what's on the front label. And
got to match.
And if it's not, then you'll go down as a hypocrite within a matter of weeks, because people will point out the inconsistency between what you're trying to sell us and who you really are on the inside. So those things they have to match each other. And so the goal today is to create a strong culture, and this has never been this way before until in the past 10 years or so, but you create a strong culture, and some people call that the brand inside. Mm-hmm. And then that emanates through the corporate workplace, and by corporate I just mean your company workplace, as well as out to the consumer's perception of your brand.
So if I work for a company, can I kind of, are there things out there that say this is what I'm kind of looking for in a good culture? Are there certain things I'm looking for? Maybe if I'm older, or if I'm a millennial, or
to be hired there?
Yeah, well, no. If I'm an employee and I want to say what am I thinking if I think I'm in a good culture? What makes that from my employee standpoint?
Right. Well, if you're an employee somewhere and you love the culture, it's simply because it's meeting your needs. Okay. And those needs, and this is funny to say this, but the key to creating engagement that therefore creates what we consider a strong culture is meeting your needs. And so
that's part of the magnet, right?
In a way, the whole magnet it's the same thing when we're trying to create magnetic tension with a customer. The same thing is used to create magnetism with our employees. And so I look at you the same way I would look at a customer, and I say, okay, you're my employee, what do you want? Well, I know the first thing you want is a paycheck.
Right.
And so, that's obviously one of the...
so I got to be happy with what I'm getting paid.
You've got to be happy with what you're getting paid. And now, a lot of the biggest, strongest cultures are cultures where that's not necessarily the case, but I'll get to why that is in a minute. But if you just start at the bottom, and I always start with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which was simply a theory in the 50s that psychologist Abraham Maslow came up with, that just sort of outlined all the different things that a human being might need at any point. And he also explained that they kind of go in a sequential order, that you got to start with, am I about to die? Am I surviving? Am I in any kind of threat? And once those questions are answered favorably, then people begin to evolve up into different kinds of needs, all the way up to what we would consider psychosocial needs or existential needs, maybe philosophical needs. But every employee has that, and then of course it's different for every company. But if you just kind of think through the different things that make a person comfortable, like you got to have pay and benefits, right? You've got to have an operational system. When I give you a job and tell you to go do something, it can't be too frustrating. In fact, it has to be kind of satisfying to be able to nail it when you do the thing the way you're supposed to do it, and all the systems work. If the printer's broken all the time, or if you have to fax things to 7 different locations and you end up missing supper every day, those are operational things that contribute to how engaged you are with the workplace. And then there's also workload is one, stress load is one, how well I match your personal strengths to the job that I assign you to do.
Right.
So there's all of these just sort of basic blocking and tackling qualities. Things, and the reason we never think about these is because 9 times out of 10, most of those are just naturally in a good place. And we miss it a lot of times when later on, things start to go haywire, we're not really sure what it is. And when I go into a company, I actually assess for 15 categories or checkpoints. And that's just more than the natural brain thinks about. So if you don't have a framework to draw from, then you're just kind of going to say, well, he's not really happy right now, and I'm not really sure why. And he probably doesn't even know exactly why. And then once those bottom things are in place, people sort of, like Maslow predicted, that there's sort of a next level of need that starts to show up. And that's when people like you say, this is a good job and everything, but I kind of want to move up in my career. And so, the ability to advance your career is another one. And you also need to know the vision of where this is all leading. This can't just be same day.
What's my future? Or something like that?
Well, not just you, but where are we going as a company? I'm pedaling really hard right now. Is the finish line up ahead anywhere? So you kind of, and I think in terms of 3-year increments, that's a lot of companies do a 3-year strategic plan because that's about the right frame of reference for people to be able to understand their personal context and how what I do today is impacting something. If it's 10 years, then it feels like I'm out in the middle of a desert, pedaling, and every stroke of the bicycle just doesn't even make a difference because the horizon looks exactly the same. So there's things like that. Another thing that employees need to feel like, this is a great thing and I'm glad I'm here. And you never know when these things are going to show up, but they show up. That you want somebody who is helping you develop yourself personally, and not just allowing you to develop personally, but somebody who comes alongside you and says, yeah, we call it developing others. And so, maybe I've done things in some companies, they develop a whole career track. Like you may start out as a salesman, and then you may move up to an account rep, and then, so on and so on. So, if I as a company owner have done all of these things to think about ahead of time, to lay out some stepping stones for you, then that sort of is a signal to you that these people are looking to help me do the thing that I want to do. Another thing that comes up is, what we call the balance between results and relationships. And so there's this other concept in this sort of middle level of determining whether or not you like your work is, am I overly concerned about the results that you give me? Or do I care about you as a person some too? And on the other extreme, if I only care about you as a person and ignore the results, then a little alarm's going to go off in your head. And so this is just an interesting thing about psychology is that, we're all wired to look for these things. And because you have a natural quest to experience fulfillment, and accomplishing work is one of the things that helps you experience fulfillment. If that gets out of whack on either side, then a little trigger is going to go off in your brain, and it won't be long until you are not as satisfied working here and you're not really sure why. Another one at the same level is the notion that I've got to walk the walk that I talk. So the people around you, if I'm always talking about, how much we care about our customers, but then you somehow figure out that I'm just saying that because that's what I think I'm supposed to say, or that's what I want customers to hear, and then somehow you pick up on little subtle things that makes you realize that I'm really all I care about is how my bank's filling up at your expense. Well, that's called authenticity. And so there has to be something genuine about the workplace that's just consistent between the values that we proclaim and what comes out of me naturally. So whatever this DNA is that we're going to choose for our company, it really has to trace back to a little bit of my DNA as the owner of the company. And so, in fact, when I do leadership models for companies, it actually begins with a deep introspection with the leaders of the company. and we go back and we ask them their first memory as a child, and all the way back to try to figure out what makes them tick, because that's what's going to naturally come out of them when they lead this company, and it needs to be what the company is trying to say naturally makes them tick.
Yeah.
So that's how it gets consistent.
I got you. So is there any difference if you're trying to hire millennials versus anybody else? What's the main key on that?
Huge difference. Now, a lot of companies don't even get to this because everything I've described to you so far is accomplished through the disciplines of management. Like if you study and understand management, you will understand the basic blocking and tackling. I've got to cover pay and benefits. I've got to have hiring and training has to be clear. I've got to be able to select people a certain way. I've got to have operations that are all dialed in so people don't get frustrated. I've got to make sure their workload is a certain way. I've got to make sure their stress load is right, and I've got to make sure that they're put into the right position that matches their skill set. Everything I just described is a management skill. That's the byproduct of being a good manager. And you have to go to management school or read a book or whatever to learn how to do those things. If I do those things, then you've accomplished what we call a management culture. Okay, which isn't great, but it's a good start.
Right.
Once those are in place, then we move up to things that are achieved through the skill of leadership. And that's where I talked about vision, because you got to know where we're going in the next 3 years. I talked about, working to develop you and help you develop yourself. There has to be a sense of relevance and innovation as part of leadership. This idea of balancing results and relationships is a leadership skill. And finally, being authentically connected to who I am and the things that I'm suggesting that you do. Those values have to be consistent. That is leadership skills. Most companies are still wrestling with that. And remember, Maslow told us that we wouldn't get to these millennial skills unless these things are all in place. In other words, you could put all the millennial trinkets around the workspace, but nobody cares about that if their paycheck's unsatisfactory or something like that. But to answer your question, something that's different with millennials is that, and it's really not a millennial thing as much as it is just where society is in terms of its development.
So they don't shoulder all the blame then, right?
Well, civilization as a whole, if you think about it, it's now been coming up on 200 years since the Industrial Revolution. And so what that means is canned food. There was a time when there was no canned food, and that's this stuff down here. It's like, where's my next meal going to come from? Well, several generations of having food not be a big question for everybody goes by, and just like
so it's automatic. We just assume that.
Yeah. Well, we take it for granted.
Yeah.
So it's what we call a commodity now.
Okay.
And actually, so is my career advancement and everything. All these things that leadership provides. We've been reading leadership books for 50 years now. So all those things are commodities too. Most of the kids coming up today think, yeah, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to get a job. What's the big deal? If you go back 75, 100 years, that was not the attitude that people brought. So it's not so much that the kids who we call millennials are different, but it's where civilization as a whole is in its age. So it's not a matter of being, born and being 20 years old today. It's a matter that civilization itself is about 150 years old in this season that it's in. So just like Maslow described, once we get to where we think, the can of food is a commodity, and my career path and future and understanding all the things, leadership, it gives me a little bit of esteem to have a title the way leadership does, and it lets me know that I can build my life and fulfill the American dream. Once those are in place, only then do we start to see what we call millennial desires. And that's why we blame it on the generation, but it's really a byproduct of where civilization is right now. You and I are millennials too, even though we're outside of that generation, because there's something about us that's starting to reach this next level. All right, so what is this next level? This next level is something that Maslow had a name for, the psychologist that I was telling you about. He called it self-actualization. maybe a better word for it in our terms is just self-realization or self-expression. But it's this idea that, once we have food in our belly and once we have, a retirement account in the bank, now we're starting to sit around and think about the significance of who we are.
Right.
And we're starting to think about how do I, what's my purpose and how do I matter in the world? And so that's when we reach the next level. So only if all these other things are met, which they are for this generation, and now we're all of a sudden looking at these self-actualization desires. And I'm going to tell you what they are in a second. But what you have to realize is that this is the first time in the history of mankind that the majority of the workforce has reached this level in what Maslow described as the hierarchy of needs. In other words, there's always been some people who were self-actualizing, certain members of royalty, maybe certain artists who
entertainers.
Yep. But now we're looking at the core workforce is made up of, or at least in part, people who are self-actualizing. So even the bottom of the middle class has commoditized some of these things.
Right.
And so they're starting to reach that place where they're asking identity questions and significance questions and things like that. Well, there's two ways that need can get met. I can either come to work and punch the clock and then go do what I'm really concerned about, or smart companies are the ones who try to embed those into the work experience for people. Mm-hmm. And so this is what Google and Facebook and some of these Apple, some of these companies that we all look at and go, wow, what a great workplace, because they're building these desires into it. So what are these desires? They're real simple. I don't want to just do a job. I want to master a craft. And so even though it may be just putting paper into the printer, there has to be something about that makes the way I do it special. And you'll notice that, lately in the past 10 years, there's all this emphasis on craft beer and things that are craft handmade. There's sort of a return to the way things were before the industrial machines made them for us. There's a real value and appreciation for that. And that's just a signal that when we see things like that, it's connecting us back to how significant it is for the person to be involved in the production or the creation of that thing. So
ownership.
Craft is the first thing. We don't want to just do a job. We want to master a craft. In other words, we want to be good at something. Mm-hmm. The second one is that we have to have a sense of purpose in our work. Now, again, if you don't offer me the chance to do that on my job, I can go find somewhere else to do it on the weekends, which means that you're in competition with whatever that thing is on the weekend if you're my employer now. So your best bet is to make it happen right here.
Yeah.
So I want to do work that matters in the world, and this is why you'll see, the Apple employees so excited to be there. And what they're thinking subconsciously in the back of their mind is, we are on the cusp of the greatest inventions, this innovation. And here I am, I get to wear the Apple thing. I don't have a clue how the thing works. All I know is that I get to stand here and be identified with this company that matters in the world right now.
Right.
And so that's satisfying my desire to matter in the world or to be part of a cause. Some people consider their cause to be a cosmic thing or an eternal thing. They may want to go into ministry or join the Peace Corps or do something that we would consider truly transcendent. But it's just as easy to solve that by letting people do anything that matters in the world. Companies can get involved in that by, building that into their company, by celebrating that value. Some companies do it by borrowing from another. They may adopt a nonprofit that sort of shows up all the time in their experience. But that's how you build cause into the company. So we said you want to be good at something, and we observed too that you want to belong, we said that you want to be good to something, and we observed too that you want to believe in something. So those are two. The third one is what we call community. So we got craft, cause, and now community. And this is intuitive, you'll recognize it. It's the sense that I don't want to just show up and do a job, that I want to be a part of this community of the workplace. I want to have relationships. I want to have a role that is unique to me, that not just anybody could do. I don't want to be a number. I don't want to be a cubicle guy.
Right.
That I want to be part of a team. And so this is a subtle shift for a lot of companies. It just simply means that, I'm going to create a sense of belonging. I'm going to celebrate team unity. I'm going to celebrate the accomplishments that people do together. That's something that a self-actualizing worker wants that they didn't really have 50 years ago as much. And so craft, I want to be good at something. Cause, I want to believe in something. And community, I want to belong to something. Those are the three desires that are new to this generation.
Because of the self-actualization.
And we call those the traits of the millennial. And
because we as parents gave them all that stuff and all made them good on those two levels, and now they're looking for that third level, if you will.
And so if you've got millennial employees, obviously it's not going to do you any good to focus on those three
if you don't have
you haven't mastered these down here. And I'll tell you, even with the big companies that I work with, 99% of the time is spent down fixing gaps that are existing down here. And here's the thing, the results when we fix these things are astronomical. And it's just amazing because nobody's ever thought about them as a holistic unit.
Yeah.
That they're what we call, this whole thing makes up what we call the employee value proposition. Okay. And then if I offer you a proposition that has so much value, it's going to magnetize and draw you into whatever it is I'm trying to create, because he who feeds leads.
Mm-hmm.
And when I do that with 10 employees, now all of a sudden I have what you call a culture, and people look at that and they go, I don't know what that is, but it's just in their DNA. And all I've done is I've figured out what makes you tick, and I'm pushing all the right buttons so that I keep you engaged in your work.
That's the bottom line, really.
Yeah. So,
and the return on investment is just so much there.
Well,
do you find the people that are bringing you in, the people at the top, do they get re-excited about what they're doing with the company?
It's funny because this is viewed as such a soft thing. It's people think of culture and they think of HR initiatives and things like that. Well, these aren't HR initiatives at all. This is the first time that people are looking holistically at the whole picture. One of the reasons that the return on investment is so just astronomical, I'm talking, it was 5,000 to 1 in the first company I introduced this. Within 3 years, they went from growing at 5% to growing at 30%. And this was a larger company, but the dollars were just, the return on investment to them was enormous. Well, people get, the reason that there's so much opportunity here is because, not because it's this new turn that if we figure out, but it's because we've done so poorly at it up until now. Gallup started measuring engagement in 1990, and the first year they measured it was something, in the 20% range, which means that 80% of the workforce is not engaged.
Yeah.
And, some people say that engagement accounts for 40% of the productivity or the output of an employee. So imagine, if I'm paying somebody $10 an hour, well, 40% is a range of, $4. So I may be getting $8 worth of work out of you. Or if I've got a great culture, I'm getting $12 worth of work for the price of $10 an hour. So there's a huge swing, and I think it's even bigger when you synergize all the people together who are all on the same page and engaged and excited about what they do. Otherwise, you wouldn't go from 5% growth to 30% growth with the same people in 3 years.
Okay, so Ben, I remember when we were talking before, you were telling me about thoughtmosphere.
Yeah.
Tell our audience a little bit about thoughtmosphere. Give them a little piece of it.
Yeah, so probably people they're thinking they didn't hear the word right. It's thoughtmosphere. And it's just, like an atmosphere is the air we breathe. Thoughtmosphere is this, the thoughts we think. If they were to form a bubble around your head.
Like a cloud or something.
If I could see like a bubble around your head of all
Would
the
it have
things,
hair on it?
all the things you're thinking right now, it's very similar to like if I had a space helmet on, that everybody's head is surrounded by whatever's on their mind, so that's just sort of the word picture. And the reason that's important when it comes to culture is just the way people are, that, we live in an attention economy. So whatever I do is closely related to what I'm thinking about. And this is stuff that's been studied by psychologists for years, but it's even more predominant now because we have all of these, different messages that we're processing at every given moment.
Right.
All right. So in other words, if I were to, talk about something or, in other words, I could even change the pace of your work just by the soundtrack that I create around you. If I sort of talked slower and created this environment where everything was methodical and, after a while, that would begin to impact sort of the pace that your brain processes and the way you do things. I can do the same thing by emphasizing certain things. If there's something that my company's passionate about, well, I need to play that like a soundtrack in your world.
Oh, okay.
And if I surround your world,
make it part of me.
Right. And so here's the thing. Most companies under-communicate by 300%. And I think that's according to one study. I think it's actually 3,000%. Because, in the past 50 years, we've gone from 3 TV channels and whatever your local radio picked up to 1,000 channels on your TV and internet and everything else. And then, of course, all your friends have their own channels now, their Twitter accounts and everything else. So we are constantly bombarded with different messages. And the one that you're thinking about is which message. It's not the one you care about the most. It's the one that just showed up.
Yeah.
And so if I'm running a company and I've got 10 employees, I have no control over what they're thinking at any given moment. But if I think like a media company and I begin to plot and strategize ways to trickle in the things that I want you to be thinking about, and the old school way of doing this is the bulletin board, and then I'll hang out with you by the water cooler and we'll look up and see something that's supposed to be important, and then we'll go right back about our lives and nothing interrupts us because we didn't have cell phones.
Right.
But nowadays, I've got to think about ways to introduce in a relevant way the things that I want to reinforce. And so we'll see a lot of companies going back to morning meetings, afternoon meetings. Okay, meetings themselves can be boring, but we'll see companies investing in videos. We'll see companies essentially creating all of these artifacts that you surround your employees with expressions of the values that you're trying to create with your culture.
So that would be a company Facebook page and Twitter account maybe?
Those are the obvious ones. And it's different for every company. But there has to be ways, like I'll give you a couple of examples. Sometimes there's a, this Slack tool, the app Slack is a good way. Essentially text messaging or a similar medium is the best way to just jump in front of your employees.
Because they're going to look at it.
Yep, they're going to look at it. You want to get people active on that so that they're not, thinking about other things while they're working. You want to keep their brain.
Here's the thing. So if I'm an entrepreneur and I've started a company and it's me and one other person or whatever, and I'm trying to bring in more people and I want to grow my company, I think from what my first thought is, I got to feel good about my product, right? I got to feel like I have a sustainable product or sustainable service. So if I'm that person, I've got 1 or 2 employees and I want to start bringing in other employees, do I need to start thinking about those bottom line pieces and those next level pieces?
Everybody should start with the management disciplines. Everybody should start with thinking about how do
I break it down into pieces?
How does my company provide value to my employee? And first of all, there's pay and benefit. Now, just staying on the management disciplines, there's pay and benefits. Okay. There's training and onboarding. Do you feel like you're equipped with knowledge to do the thing that I'm asking you to do? That can be very frustrating.
Right. If I'm new and don't know much about it.
Right. If I don't provide the right kind of coaching and feedback, because some people don't learn by reading a manual or watching a video and then going out and trying to do it. Some people learn kinesthetically. They need you to go stand there with them and say, okay, now you try it. Does that make sense to you, or do you want me to show you again? So that's just training. That's just one of the 7 disciplines in this management level. And then, I've got to make sure that your workload makes sense and isn't crazy. Your stress load, if I've got you, the old statistic that ambulance drivers, would hang around for about 2 years and then they move on. Well, it's because it's stressful. So I've got to pay attention to balancing the stress load, all of those management disciplines.
But if I'm young, each time I bring somebody in, I got to think about that with that person.
If you create the system that, as a management system,
then they just
creates value for you, then I could just drop you in there. This is why that part's not necessarily scalable. It doesn't have to be scaled to work. But I just create this system, and once I've built it one time, I just have to maintain it. And then I can move up to the leadership disciplines, and then I can start thinking about more advanced things to meet your more advanced needs.
That makes sense. Okay, so this has been great. It's been real helpful and knowledgeable, and I know a lot of our folks are going to get a lot from this. And one of the things I always like to ask people when I kind of finish up is, I want to know how you think. I want to know what your tape is. I want to know what you say to yourself when you're in front of something that's adverse or you're trying to pep yourself up. Do you have any self-talk? Do you have a tape that you play?
Well, everybody has self-talk.
But do you have a certain self-talk?
Do you script your self-talk yourself, or do you let somebody else write that script for you? Absolutely. Well, I mean,
what are some of the things you say to yourself?
I'm not a perfect person, so I'm not trying to say that I don't ever have any negative thoughts. Right. I just have shared with you before how certain circumstances come up, and I immediately start worrying about them and everything. Well, for me, I mean, just to be honest with you, I think the fundamental belief in me is that God has a purpose in everything.
So would you say that God has a purpose for me?
I say it all the time.
How many times a day do you say that?
Well, it depends on the day. But it's kind of like pray without ceasing. You know, that just has to be the attitude.
That's your walk.
And if you look on the whiteboard around this room, it won't take long till you'll see a statement of affirmation similar to that in some form or fashion. But that's the main thing, is I just, for whatever reason, was
believe in it?
I was told from the earliest I can remember that, God has a purpose for me, and, He's going to work all things together for good, and that doesn't mean that I'm not going to experience, losses and pain and everything else. But I've been able to study throughout years, from history, different characters in the Bible and so forth, and how, I think that my currency is different too. My currency is not, the United States dollar or anything else, that I'm able to be invested in things that are from an eternal kingdom. And so, I can take a hit financially, in my circumstances without it really hitting me in the real bank. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that comes up as
faith
self-talk.
And the things about that, knowing that.
Yeah, I don't know how people do it without faith. I don't mean to. I admire them. I guess.
Something.
Yeah,
they
have something. They have faith in something, I guess. But I feel like I'm an optimist, and not everybody in my family is an optimist. So a lot of times I feel I end up saying these things a lot of times because I'm trying to, encourage them.
Yeah, your kids.
Yep, kids, spouse, others.
Well, hey, that concludes our rock star interview with Ben Ortlip, and Ben's an awesome guy, and he's got some stuff coming out in the future. I think will be fun. Do we want to talk about any of that? No, not yet. So anyway, Ben's a great guy, and I hope you enjoyed this time with Ben. I hope you've learned something about how you can create a more dynamic culture in your business, and thank you for tuning in to Local Rock Stars.